today let's talk about when to choose for managed or self-managed services. So
And within managed and self-managed,
there's
it can also be open source
or
or
close.
closed source.
Yep, exactly. Let's dive into that. When to choose what, and how. Like what we recommend to people, as we get that question quite often. Let's go a bit over the benefits,
Every
what
day.
the risks are, and stuff like that. Especially, we discussed it in the last episode as well that some people are like, why is this so expensive? If I just install it on a virtual machine and install MySQL, it's just the cost of the instance. While if I take it use it managed, then it costs a lot more money. Why is that? And stuff like that. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive into it. So, what
I
are
think
you?
we can give some good examples first, because maybe it's difficult to imagine what is actually managed,
Yeah, for sure.
what is unmanaged. So if I run a MySQL, just like we did back in the day, on a VM,
Yeah,
that can be open source and unmanaged.
yeah, definitely.
If I run an Oracle on a machine, that can be closed source and unmanaged. So
Yeah, true.
there is already a difference, like between, do I go for open source software or do I go for closed source, maybe paid, even though that you can have MySQL and also a paid version of MySQL. You can have software that is that you have to pay for, that you get support and so on, but that's still open source. So there's a lot of I don't think we're really going to talk about that so much today, because for us it's often irrelevant whether it's open source or closed source.
Yeah,
Okay, there are definitely some benefits if it's open source. Like you can look in the source, you can make PRs, you can add code. Not sure if so many people actually do that. It's maybe something for bigger companies, enterprises, to have a dedicated team of committers, contributors to certain software.
Yeah, definitely.
I was working for a consulting company that actually had a Cassandra contributor, for example.
Okay.
That would make sense if you maybe want to develop them sort of features, or you want
sure.
to have someone that knows the code base. So there's definitely there is an open source benefit.
Especially when it's like bleeding edge, like back then, like it's pretty useful to have somebody who can fix it immediately for clients. Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly, yeah. And I think we have both come from an open source free software environment. We went to conferences. We were always more on the Linux side of things rather than the Microsoft kind of things.
Because of that reason as well, like the closed source versus the open source. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we should start saying that we are actually pro open source, unmanaged, like to begin with.
Depending on the use case, yeah.
But then you have to run software that needs to run for 10, 20 years. And then things start to change, I think. Because are you then going to run your MySQL server on a self-managed VM somewhere on a machine, on a physical machine that you maybe bought or are renting? And that's where we think that you should look at the choices. Okay, you're going to run this thing for maybe a short project, a year or something, or you have someone dedicated, an engineer that can maintain it, or you just want to run an application, and it's just maybe 20 years is too long, but let's say you want to run it for 5 to 10 years, hands off. I mean, of course you need to do security updates, but like how far can you get without touching it?
Mm-hmm.
Because every time you touch it, it costs money. You need to pay someone if you want to have an engineer looking at it, basically. Full-time or part-time or consultancies, but it still costs money, right? So,
and it has the potential to break.
yeah. And that's where when Amazon came out, it was with these managed services. That's where for us it became really interesting to say we can run something and this can run for years and we don't really have to think about it anymore. This is most likely not going to break, and even if it breaks, it's not really our fault, because then the cloud provider has to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And takes care of backups and stuff like that, because it's also something important. Like backups are only as good as you ever tested them, basically. The same goes with managed service. Obviously, you have to test that it actually works and that the application is able to recover. But nevertheless, I think that's a very important thing that you also, like support, for example, if something goes wrong, you have somewhere to reach out instead of like shouting on a Stack Overflow post of 10 years ago with somebody who faced the same issues or something like that.
Or in a GitHub PR. That's the issue that I always see is like, okay, I run into this bug. Okay, it's documented. The PR is open, like the pull request. Someone is, it's not even a pull request. It can be an issue. There's no code yet to fix the issue. Everyone is aware that there's an issue, but it's not getting fixed because maybe it doesn't have priority.
Not looking at you, HashiCorp and Terraform repo, but like,
yeah. Because there's so many people there. It's like, okay, yeah, we have, let's say, 1,000 users, and 900 of these users, 999, are not interested in or not hitting this bug that you are hitting. So, and then it can be interesting. And actually, I was maybe going to talk later about it, but no, I can mention it now. So even though software is open source, that doesn't mean they're going to accept your fix. So I submitted PRs to Terraform, HashiCorp. They never even looked at it. They just said, we don't have enough resources to look at every PR because we're getting so many PRs. Our software is quite popular. So if you don't get so many upvotes, we're not even going to look at it. So we want something in Terraform. It's open source. Great. Let me just write the code, submit the code. Everything is okay, following their guidelines, but never got merged into...
And it was to actually fix a bug, not to add a feature that was...
No, I think that was a feature.
Oh, was it a feature? Okay, okay.
Yeah, that was a feature. It was a feature that other people could also need.
Yeah.
But indeed, there's a lot of people that want the latest resource that just ALS added that they want in Terraform, and then this feature was not that important. So
no,
it
true.
just never got merged into it. So it's not guaranteed that if it's open source and it's backed by a big company that your code will go in. But you could then fork within your company that software.
Well, once you go that path, it's like, yeah.
If it's important to you, yeah.
No, true.
But then you have to, the difficulty is indeed, then you have to maintain the code base, and that's also super difficult. It's also a lot of work.
Absolutely, and then maybe at some point merge back, but like, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that if you are a smaller organization.
Definitely. But the benefit of these managed services, so not only if I want to run a database for the next 5 or 10 years, and I pick now, let's say DynamoDB, which is not even open source, so nobody knows what's under it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to be around in 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to retire this service. I'm sure that the API is going to be stable. And I think that's very important. You write your application using this API that Amazon exposes. Yep. And Amazon is not going to change this API.
Nope.
They might deprecate certain parts over years, but you can see that they don't do this lightly, especially with something like DynamoDB when you're interacting with the database. Well, you cannot be 100% sure, but I'm very quite sure that if you write an application today with DynamoDB,
99%.
Yeah, that in 10 years, it should still be running
without touching it.
Without having touching it, yeah. Maybe you want to update some library that you used, some dependency. Maybe there was a security bug. There's an ALS SDK. Maybe you want to update that over time. But in general, like even if you don't touch it, and I think we even have deployed software 10 years ago on Alias that is still running today that we barely touched, just security update, just because it's all using managed services. And actually what happens is actually quite funny, right? If you don't touch it at all, and it uses something like SD Cache, then you start getting emails from Amazon. This is end of life. We cannot really support it. We are automatically going to upgrade to a new version. So make sure that you test it. We didn't test it. Developer was gone. Yeah. Like if it breaks, we will fix it. But actually, you just upgrade it, right? It did the upgrade of an end of life version to again supported version. and we didn't even see anything. So that's the interesting part there, is that if you use managed services, that there is not a lot of effort needed to keep it on running.
Nope. Obviously, there's something involved here as well. It's the costing, like
The cost, yeah.
especially with Amazon lately, also charging extra when you are running a deprecated or like not deprecated, but like an older version.
Almost end of life.
Yeah, the almost end of life. But just basically, you can still pay for it. Like it will still work. It will just cost you more
Yes.
money, but it will.
Yes.
It will. They will keep it in the air until a certain point. They were trying to incentivize you to move to a more recent version, but when it all comes down to is that it's still managed by them, but you have to pay a little bit more for it, which is also like a big benefit. Obviously from cost perspective that's something else, but from an operational perspective it's still managed, it's still like kind of supported. Obviously
Gives you options.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you're against a wall and you have to do something, and that's always good.
Yeah, not saying that like in enterprises you will also find the virtual machine that has been spun up 20 years ago and runs something that nobody touched.
It works and it keeps on working.
It works. It keeps on working. That's true. But then at some point you might have to change it, and then it becomes very difficult to change it. Whereas
Oh yeah,
on a managed cloud, okay, the APIs didn't change, but you still can get support. And then if you run something for 20 years, are you still going to get vendor support? Well, hopefully, yes, if the vendor is still around. Amazon's a big vendor, most likely to be around for a long time. Not saying that it is so much better. It's just saying, like I said, Amazon kind of update the end of life sometimes for you even. So you are not running an end of life
anymore, no. Nope.
Yeah, so there are certain mechanisms that make it interesting, that okay, because they have such a scale that they can actually just automatically upgrade it. They have some scripts that you don't have to figure out. And because they have the scale, they can actually just script it for you without having to pay more. But indeed, like I say, the cost is important because you pay extra. And then when you talk to someone and they say, okay, but cloud is so expensive, it's just another computer. Well, it's not. You need to look at all the managed services. That's the benefit that you are getting, is that you don't have to, over the years, keep on updating it yourself.
It's hands off, basically.
It's more hands off. Not completely hands off, it's more hands off. And that's one of the big benefits, that you just need less of engineering time. If you are somewhere in a region where engineering time is super expensive, well, you're better benefiting. If you have actually engineers in a low-cost region, maybe offshore or something, well, then maybe not. Maybe you can benefit of running everything on a VM with those offshore engineers. But what we then see is that it doesn't give you the same uptime guarantee. It doesn't give you the same. You cannot do the same service level agreements as when it's all handled by a third party, Amazon in this case, or Azure or Google, where these things are managed, and they give you more of a guarantee that it keeps on running.
Yeah, but also that uptime is a very, very good point as well. Obviously, like the managed services of the cloud providers have very high uptime because it's managed by people who don't do anything else, and like their data centers are resilient and they have like multiple fibers and all that stuff. But it's also not, for some applications, it's basically not important as well. Like, okay, you don't need to, if you have an uptime of 70%, that will be really bad. But if the difference between 99.95 and 99.9999 whatever is like sometimes irrelevant for a lot of applications, especially if you have like a downtime calculator that you can see the difference, and obviously there's more cost involved if you want to achieve the same thing than a cloud provider. And then even if you're offshore, it requires so much expertise to be able to manage like a automatic failover MySQL or stuff like that. It's just such a pain in comparison that you might as well just better take like the managed version. While you can also see that in the pricing, obviously. They have come up like with the pricing that they see what the advantages are of the service of running it like that. You don't need a DBA, you just like stuff like that, like an infrastructure DBA, I mean. But
yeah, but I also I read about that it's very difficult to find still the people
yeah,
that can manage all these things on-prem for you now that you have all these database services. So at some point, it might be more interesting to hire cloud engineers that know about Azure, AWS, Google, or other cloud providers than to have someone managing, being a DBA and a system engineer locally on your local environment. So yeah, over time, it's going to be even more difficult to run things locally, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's very niche expertise that is required to be able to do that. While a cloud engineer has a more broader knowledge about not all, but
the abstraction layer.
Exactly, the majority of the cloud services, and he can provision middleware and databases and stuff like that. While if you need the expertise to run it locally in your data center or whatever, it's that segment of what they need to do that they require the expertise in. And then you have while you have one cloud engineer who can do that for quite some big clients, and if you compare that then to you have network engineers, DBAs, system administrators, all that stuff, then it all adds up in the end.
Yeah, and I think you are a DBA of Oracle software.
Yeah.
And then there's not a DBA of MySQL or Microsoft SQL.
Yeah, there's a different expertise as well, yeah.
Yeah, so often you either know one or the other. But if you are on Amazon, whether you have to provision a Microsoft SQL or Oracle or Postgres, MySQL, because you have this abstraction layer, a cloud engineer should be able to do that.
Exactly, to migrate that expertise away. And that's often what I think a lot of people don't see immediately in the cost. They see a cost standing there and they're like, oh my God, that's so expensive. While if they take a step back and then look what's everything that's included, it's actually, depending on use case and stuff like that, obviously, it's quite cheap, in my opinion, in comparison than when you need all those people.
And if you build an on-prem environment that can handle compute, let's say private cloud, which is now kind of hyped, well, people often end up with building a Kubernetes cluster, building some quite complex infrastructure services that also need to be maintained, that are also expensive, that you would actually have to compare, okay, are you going to run it on public cloud, or are you going to run it on private cloud? And for private cloud, what engineers do I need? What do I do if my Kubernetes cluster stops working?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do I go to if my engineer cannot fix it? And that's the interesting point as well, going back to
Stack Overflow.
Going back to something like Amazon, a lot of people tell me that when I actually have a problem, Amazon support is really great in solving it. And some other cloud providers are not always that great in helping me. Over time, this can change, of course. But
yeah, those are snapshots in time, yeah.
Depending on what company is your vendor can actually be very helpful.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do everything yourself in a house, where are you going to go to? And who is your vendor? Is your vendor some generic company that owns the platform? Or is just a reseller of the platform? Or just implemented the platform for you without having actually a connection to those vendors? And the interesting part is that you have a direct connection to your vendor. That if you have let's say you get an error, you can just say, I get this error, fix it for me. Whereas if you Kubernetes cluster locally breaks down, who is your company supporting this? Does this company have a direct connection with the Kubernetes team if it's something that needs to be solved? And then indeed, if you're a bigger company and you have lots of engineers, then this becomes definitely less of an issue. And you see, for example, GitHub runs Kubernetes clusters. At some point they were running the biggest Kubernetes cluster ever. And you could then see that they were writing about it, and they were saying we actually have people committing to the source code of Kubernetes,
can imagine,
fixing it ourselves. So they have their own infrastructure team, and they then are tied into this technology.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are completely not a technology company, you are a technology company because you offer something in an industry, but the industry that you are in is not technology. Well, you don't want to be exposed to all those things. And then maybe you want to have something managed. And it doesn't even need to be Amazon. Like, for example, Heroku is also a nice, like a platform as a service, a nice way of getting your application just running. And then kind of platform as a service kind of died down a bit with Kubernetes, because now you can run everything on Kubernetes. But just to have one platform and one way of deploying is actually quite great. You just have this one platform. That's how you deploy your app, your services, the databases there. That's also quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely, especially to start with. And at some point, like we did some migrations from Heroku to other cloud vendors, but that was mostly like when you start to scale. And then, yeah, obviously, if you start to scale, there's like a financial benefit of that as well, hopefully for the company. So then it was like, it would make sense to move some parts out of there. And yeah, because then that's also an interesting part what we hear a lot. Yeah, but if you're in the cloud and you're using DynamoDB, you have a vendor lock-in. You will never be able to migrate out and all those drama things. And then I think like about, yeah. But where would you go to? And that's most of the times it's not a clear answer to it. Like even if it's in another technology, mostly where the data locality is, like where the data is stored, that's the vendor they're going to use, right? Like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I don't think you should spend a lot of effort upfront abstracting all these things and saying there might be a possibility, a very remote possibility in the future that I'm not going to use, that I'm not going to have access to technology X, so I'm going to abstract this in some way. You can put in the effort when you're actually going to move, instead of doing it up front. And then it might even be less effort to do it at the time you want to do a migration, because then you know what you actually wrote, what you have. Then doing it up front, because up front you don't even know how it's going to end up like. So you're trying to abstract something that you don't even know how it's going to end up like.
No, absolutely. To try to avoid something that, yeah, that is not needed. And also, like,
but even then, there are often alternatives, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
DynamoDB has Cassandra. Like, if you really, really want it, because okay, let's say that you start with a platform as a service. Let's say Heroku. You scale. Okay, but it's not good enough. I need enterprise features. Often, like you need to be SOC 2 certified or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it doesn't really work that well in this platform as a service, and you need more flexibility. You move to, let's say, Amazon. Okay, you grow. You say, Amazon's too expensive. You could literally, at that point, when you now spend all this money, you could at that point even move on-prem or certain things on-prem or certain things to an infrastructure provider that is cheaper. And then you say, okay, what services do I have in AWS, like DynamoDB, that I now need to have myself? How do I migrate those? And it's not completely impossible to then start migrating. I think it's kind of wrong to say upfront that you don't want to use what is available to you for the possibility to ever migrate. Like okay, it's a data migration is not easy, but it's doable.
Yeah, it's not impossible. Exactly. Some people tend to think that you not even query it anymore, that the cloud vendor will own the data and you will not be able to touch it or export it, because if you can export it, you can do whatever you want with it. Is it going to be maybe a bit of a pain? Maybe, but like, is it going to be worth the hassle of setting all the stuff up in front while you can just use DynamoDB, for example?
Yeah. And at that point, you can redesign.
Yeah.
As in, if you say, okay, on Amazon you're paying too much, sometimes you could redesign on Amazon and then pay a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always the right solution to switch to another vendor. But if you are switching to another vendor and you will redesign, well, it's a good opportunity to redesign and then anyway switch maybe technology, because now you can think, you can think again, like, is this my access patterns, the way I use this technology, is this the right answer? And then maybe on this other cloud provider, you would have a better solution and a more inexpensive solution. So I would definitely not worry too much about vendor lock-in, as long as you indeed have like the code, the data, then you can just do whatever you want with it. And also nowadays with Docker images, lucky Docker image is your artifact. You don't need to say, I'm going to run Kubernetes on Amazon because I have Kubernetes on Google Cloud. Your image is your artifact. And then you just have to recreate the runtime, which is not that much work. I mean, okay, it can be a lot of work, but then you probably made it too complex to start with.
Yeah, absolutely.
But okay, there's secrets management. There's like, okay, you have your runtime, but yeah, it's still the same artifact. Like, we sometimes have artifacts, and that I find super interesting, that can run within a Lambda on a Kubernetes cluster or on an ECS cluster on Amazon. So you can just write code within your software within your container that says, I'm gonna check, I'm gonna see on what platform am I, and depending on what platform I am, I'm gonna execute code different. For example, if I'm on Azure, I will then go to Azure Blob Storage to get some data. But if I'm not on Azure, I'm on AWS, I'll just go to S3, and that's just possible. You can just abstract in the code based on what runtime you are. And okay, then people say, yeah, but in Kubernetes, that's why Kubernetes is for. That is your abstraction layer. But then in practice, you see that you have sometimes different implementations on AWS cloud as an Azure cloud. So it's not always possible. Even though if you then go into platform engineering, you can indeed create your own platform, so it's completely agnostic. But then I think you're more talking about that than you are on Netflix or something like multi-cloud setups. If you are a small company and you're scared of vendor lock-in, like there is a way to abstract it even later in the code if necessary. You would just kind of run your software the easiest way possible now. Don't spend any money. If your app actually gets traction, if you are a small company startup, if your app gets traction, there will be money later on to refactor if you want to change vendors.
It's not a reason to run vanilla Kubernetes on VMs just to avoid like the administrative like burden of that is just way too high.
And also, I wouldn't call Kubernetes managed.
No, yeah.
Like there's still so much effort needed to manage a Kubernetes cluster yourself. It's not really a super managed solution, right? So there are a lot of services on the cloud that maybe the cloud says it's managed, but actually only a small part is managed. Like DynamoDB is a great example of something that you don't have to manage the instance types. But then when you want to, let's say, run a RabbitMQ, okay, it's a completely different service, or Elasticsearch, well, you still have to choose your instance type and have to manage the version and all these kind of things. So it's not, and that's the same with Kubernetes. You have to manage on what version you are. So the biggest benefit of being on some of these core AWS services or Azure services or Google Cloud services is that even if it's proprietary software, you have all this, they have the stability of the API. It will be around for a long time. You don't have to worry about instance types. Also processes change, architectures sometimes change. We went from Intel to ARM. So that is definitely a benefit. Like you can be very pro open source and everything, but then when you have to run your app for a very long time and you don't want to touch it for long, okay, proprietary software that is not open source, that's just purposely built, can actually be a very good choice.
Yeah, definitely. And also, yeah, price-wise, if you look at so a lot of those arguments for vendor lock-in is the next step is like, yeah, but if they raise the prices and they multiply it by 3, then it's going to be super expensive for us. But like in reality, why would they do that, right? Like they basically would not have, they would not have any clients left. So in that sense, I haven't seen it yet. Besides then the when the older versions of databases are being like sunsetted, but for the rest, like that's also not a self-developed solution of the cloud vendor. So in that sense, this also is not something to worry about, in my opinion.
What I find also interesting is that it's all integrated with each other. So
yeah, true.
Amazon brings out a product. Okay, they will integrate with IAM, maybe with their chatbot on Slack. So you have all these integrations that you have with these products that are very nice. And then often when you go with a vanilla version of a product, you have to do all these integrations yourself. So often when we talk to a client, they either say, I'm running Kubernetes with Grafana, Elasticsearch, Prometheus, and other open source tools, and then they have to do all the integration themselves. And even though they run on a cloud provider, like on Amazon or Azure, they still have to do all the integrations themselves. Or you have a customer that says, I run only on these managed services, AWS, ECS, for example, or like the other versions that you have to just run containers on other cloud providers with their managed database service, with their database managed logs, they manage tracing, they manage metrics, and it's just completely different. There goes a lot of effort into having the engineers that know Prometheus well and doing the integration with Prometheus and Slack, for example, and Grafana and Slack, and then and Git, and then so you spend quite a lot of time reinventing the wheel a little bit.
The time could be used elsewhere. Like that's I think that's a methodology that we try to always look is like, okay, you need tech, but tech is like a way of achieving a goal and not the goal itself. And if it doesn't make much sense, of course it's cool to play with the latest new trend, and it's good for your resume and stuff like that. But in the end of the day, it's like a goal a way to achieve a goal, right? So make that as seamless as possible, I would recommend.
Yeah, and also, is this software going to be around for forever? So if it's backed by a big company, let's say Microsoft and Amazon, likely that it's going to be around for a long time. Not always sure, obviously. But then, for example, there was a lot of software within, I think, Red Hat, and there was another company as well that were bought by IBM, like CoreOS. Actually, I think this CoreOS and this other company, which I forgot the name, I think it was bought first by Red Hat, and then Red Hat got bought by IBM. But then Red Hat actually, or IBM then, said we are not going to maintain all this software. So if you then were running CoreOS and all these other technologies that were related to it, suddenly it's not supported anymore. And that's always a pity when you have an nice open source version of something, you're using it, your whole infrastructure is built on it. This company get bought by IBM. IBM says we are not doing this anymore. Yeah, then you have to migrate away from it. That's a lot of work. Now IBM bought HashiCorp. I mean, I don't think they will sunset any of the popular products. Like Terraform will hopefully be still around, but maybe some of the less popular products they will stop supporting, and that's always a pity. Whereas indeed, if you are a paid user, and I think that's the difference that you can distinguish. If you are using open source, you're not always paying for it.
Yeah, they don't own you anything, basically.
Exactly. You get community support, but the software can just disappear because they don't have a revenue stream. Whereas if you pay this extra money for RDS, well, it's a revenue stream. Amazon is not going to get rid of RDS because it just gives them a lot of business.
Yeah.
And that sometimes also plays a role, I find. So let's build this app that can last 10, 20 years. Maybe, okay, you're going to use MySQL to build it. Maybe you're going to use a programming language and some dependencies. But then you can already quickly see like what dependencies are actually backed by big companies, or what dependencies are already around for longer, and what dependencies of your app might disappear.
Yeah.
Because
also,
someone is doing it for free. So if you're gonna build this app that needs to run for a long time, there's certain decisions that you can make. You can run it managed, but yeah, if you are not paying every single vendor that you're using, it might just disappear, and then you have to. Maybe it's not a lot of work to get it out, but maybe it is, or maybe you don't know whether this vendor went away. Then there's a security bug, and then you only realize much later. And that's kind of the issue sometimes with open source, is that, and there's this XKCD that shows like this whole machine, right? And then exactly. This small, like a bar that is like, if you remove this bar, everything collapses. And this small bar are these libraries and or these software that you're using for free that nobody's paying for, and someone that is maintaining it maybe as a side job, and he's not getting any money, and then at some point he might say, "Oh, I'm not going to do it anymore," or he says,
"I'm going to start creating furniture."
Start creating furniture, because that's what every software engineer does nowadays, seems. And yeah, he might not update it anymore, might be a security bug, or he might just say like, okay, I just didn't catch it, the security bug. Because I can just not maintain it. This Log4j was, for example, like that open source project. Not blaming anyone. You have to kind of think about it. Like you ideally, what we should do is just give like all these big organizations that use it should give these people money. There should be like some kind of structure, ideally, that says like how you protect. Like when you listen to a song, there's an organization that protects the rights of the copyright. Well, maybe you should have like an organization, maybe they already exist, I don't know, that you can actually pay for open source software used in a commercial setting, and that then tries to give it to the people that have open source software somehow in some way.
To make an incentive to keep it maintained.
Yeah, because you have an incentive to have it running, because at one point in time it always looks cool and awesome what certain software can do and how it's designed, but is the software going to be around for a long time? We don't know. And if you are in a hobby project, it doesn't matter, right? You just glue everything together. But if you are running enterprise grade software, you want to know whether these people are going to be around.
Or they switch model. They switch revenue model, and they go from open source to like, this feature, the basic is open source, but if you want a little more version, like a little more features, then it's going to be the paid version. And then you basically, with your back against the wall, and then you basically have to pay it, while, of course, then the risk is a bit less, but then you didn't foresee that cost. And depending on how much it will be, that can be an issue as well.
Yeah, indeed. We also came across, like, you use some VPN software, open source version, that they're trying to hype as like, this is the next big thing. Forget about OpenVPN. Let's do WireGuard based. We provide this open source, and it was not 1.0 yet. And then they say, okay, the 1.0 is actually a completely paid version, and the previous version we're not going to maintain. So no solutions anymore. So yeah. But I think that's more with younger projects, like, and you can also kind of see if it's venture backed, like these software projects that start as a Y Combinator, then venture backed, and then they need to have at some point a business model, otherwise it's not going to work.
Nope, else they will not get backed as well.
Yeah, indeed. So what is their revenue model? If they're giving away for free, maybe it might change, because there's at some point when the venture capital runs out, or they're like, they need to raise a new round, they need to prove that they're going to have revenue, they need to implement revenue streams, then maybe this free software is not that free anymore. But there are also some nice examples of big companies that actually are still open source. I think MongoDB and other ones, right? And then I think this is what we should have another episode on, is then why are they changing suddenly this licensing model? And then, like, why is AWS implementing a fork of some open source version that was licensed different? And it's all quite interesting to see, and goes back to, well, if these people are not getting paid, can they still exist? And then the open source movement is sometimes also against these more restricted licenses. But if nobody's getting paid, will they be around forever?
Yeah, exactly. The people have to pay their bills, right? Like if you're behind your computer in the evening and you're programming for 4 or 5 hours and you have a successful day job or whatever, it's good for you. But at some point, if like the day job's like you get fired or whatever, and then it doesn't make much sense that you just basically are working for free at some point. And then some people need to switch then. Yeah.
Also, I read things like, you do this for free. Okay, it's not always like that, right? But
no,
you do this for free. And then people are like opening GitHub issues and saying, this needs to be fixed.
Yeah, exactly. Super toxic.
What is the SLA on this? Why is this not fixed yet? And you're like, well, you should start using this in this big enterprise for free. And then you're gonna tell me, like, take a support contract, give me some money, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And not the buy me a coffee link, but like substantial amount of money. Yeah, absolutely. No, I've seen things passing on Hacker News and stuff like that. I saw some commits passing by. You think, Jesus, like you submit them under your name, right? Like it's not anonymous. Like, Jesus, how can you be like that? But yeah, that's probably the people who are posting it like that are also under a huge pressure and don't know what to do. And yeah, but nevertheless, that's not how you treat people who are fixing your stuff for free, basically.
Yeah. Also, I read something interesting on, I think it was on Hacker News, but already a long time ago. That is like, okay, why open source software backed by such big companies is getting so complex? And that's also something interesting that let's say Kubernetes. Okay, it's backed by these big tech companies, so they hire all these people to work on it. They also have their own kind of interest in it, certain roadmap, certain features they want in there because they want to sell this to their customers on their cloud provider or just as a on-prem infrastructure. So suddenly you have something that shouldn't be that complex, which suddenly gets massively complex because these big tech companies are throwing so much money on it. So much code gets written, so many features get implemented for whatever reason.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it can do so much, but suddenly if you then adopt this technology, it's so complex, so written also maybe for the interest of other tech companies. And for example, for Kubernetes, it has a lot of releases, which might also not be in your interest. People are complaining now, can we not have a LTS release of Kubernetes? Amazon has support for all the releases, but the Kubernetes today, I don't think Kubernetes has a long-term supported release. They just continue to release newer versions, which can be quite difficult if you don't want to upgrade your cluster every 3 or 6 months. So who is the customer in such case, right? Why are these things getting developed? Is the customer a big tech company, or are they really developing something for everyone? And then sometimes it can get a bit murky, I think.
Yeah, true.
You don't always know. And then is this technology a good fit? So
that makes sense. It's the same thing with if you look at Spinnaker, for example, like how it's built as well. You see that it's built by a very big company, and that also makes it attractive to use. So people want to use it because the big company developed it and it's cool technology. But then if you look how much time it takes to maintain it and to be able to run it, and it kind of defeats the purpose. It works, I can imagine it works great within Netflix itself, but like outside of there, like there's so many easier alternatives that are managed, like.
And even today, we don't really see so many people adopting Spinnaker anymore. I think there was a time that people were like, oh yeah, I want to run this because it's how Netflix runs it. But we see these trends, right? That this hype cycle, like suddenly everyone wants to run this technology. Everyone wants to run CDK. Everyone wants to run Kubernetes, and then people actually have adopted it, and then people are like on Reddit and other forums, maybe you shouldn't do it.
Yeah. It's a bit more complex than honestly we thought in the beginning when we were installing it, but now, it shows some issues. No, true, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's actually completely another point, but this is one of the reasons I like Golang so much. It's just like you have one programming language, so many core libraries that they designed, almost no external dependencies, so you can do a lot of things within one programming language, one modern programming language for the cloud. To write cloud software, to write on top of Kubernetes even. You don't need to go to all these different libraries, packages that you don't know the people of, because you have Node.js downloads lots of different libraries. You have Java. Where do these Java packages come from? Who maintains them? Like some of them indeed exist already for 20 years, but who are the companies maintaining them? And do you need them to monitor these security issues yourself? Most likely, but will there always be a fix? Like, is this package still maintained? And now what you then see is also maybe beside the point, but also people that are trying to inject their own software, their own commits, their own kind of like custom code to get into
with SSH
libraries, and then like this thing that almost got in the. Was it in Ubuntu or I don't remember.
I think so.
Yeah, almost something got like something.
That would have been.
It's kind of a
scary.
malware got into to Ubuntu almost. They just caught it by a contributor, right? So the less kind of contributors that you you have within your answers in your software, kind of the better. The less scope, the less potential security bugs that there can be. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, that's kind of what I think. So, and the more easy minimalistic you can write and deploy applications, the this 5 to 10 year application is gonna run better, less maintenance if you have a lot less of external dependencies
Yeah,
that you don't
definitely.
know who are these.
Nope. Not only that, it's like you said, who's going to fix them? What is in them?
When you are gone,
Yeah,
when the
exactly.
person that actually wrote this is gone, most likely, yeah.
But it is also a good thing that you like you said earlier as well. It's a good analogy that you use like basically your application container as an artifact as well. So those things are pre-packaged, and nevertheless, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any security issues that need to be remediated. And then if some packages are lost and stuff like that, it can be a hassle really quickly.
So yeah, I think going to cost effectiveness. It's not always that managed services will be more cost effective, especially let's say when you do an MVP. It can be more cost effective. Let's say that you want to run your application on a free tier on a cloud provider. You will use DynamoDB with Lambda on AWS, for example. So when there's no traffic, you don't pay anything, zero. When you have traffic, you pay. This could be a good approach. But there's also a good approach into I'll just spin up. Let's say you're a startup, you're just making MVP. I'll just spin up an instance. Everything goes on this instance. Only when I have traction, I'll start looking at these more complex technologies. So now I just keep it super simple because I have actually time. I can just upgrade the libraries, everything. Like I can just create another VM and then start over. Kind of as long as I have my code base, I'll just start with them with the latest technology. So that can also be a good approach. So it doesn't always not managed service is not always the right answer. I think what the wrong answer is here is to then go to like use like a lot of cloud services, managed and unmanaged, mixed, and then have like let's say Kubernetes and then maybe Elasticsearch and then this and then that, and then have a lot of services that you then have to maintain, that you then have to make sure that these are upgraded and also scaled at some point, because then once you start growing, if you then have to fix 10 different bottlenecks, that's also not going to be easy. So when you start, or even when you are already a project, it's more looking at cost effectiveness, I think, is a big driver between managed and unmanaged. Like if we pick this technology, what is it going to cost us now? What's it going to cost us in the long term? What if we scale? Like how much is it going to cost us? How much maintenance is necessary then? What is our cost of maintenance? What's our cost of training? Like, let's say you have a couple of people, these people need to get trained. If this is like a core Amazon service, maybe there's easy Amazon training around that they can take and they will be able to level up. Why is this something like, I'm just saying something, HBase? Oh, that's really more complex service that takes a lot more time to train engineers in. So yeah, what is the cost of training, the cost of resources? What is the cost of increase in complexity? Right. So you add this other service to your already existing platform of applications that you might be running for within your organization. Yeah, you add something new to it, or like you add HBase to it. Well, it increases complexity like crazy. But you add DynamoDB to it for something. Well, yeah, don't have to manage it. It doesn't cost that much unless you need a lot of read and writes. Okay, it's not easy to understand initially, but then there might be training that you can follow if someone can do the initial database design and it's done properly.
Yeah,
Actually,
absolutely.
it might be a good service
And there's a
for
lot of
you.
documentation around and stuff like
Yeah,
that as well. Like
yeah,
and like you said, the cloud provider benefits from giving you the technology, so they also want to make it easier for you to step in.
yeah. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to give away in this episode. Like, it's not black and white. Sometimes you go for managed, sometimes for unmanaged, sometimes for open source, sometimes for closed source. and that the driver should be okay. That it shouldn't only be cost, obviously, but a big reason is cost and maintenance, and how is this going to turn out in a couple of years when the person implementing is gone? Can we still maintain it? And these are all things that you should take into account and maybe write down in a document to then make a decision. And not just lightly spin up another service, because that's now very easy, right? So now you can just go in your cloud console and say, oh, now we have Elasticsearch.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just spun it up. Now that's going to be added to our stack.
And now we have another box on the architecture diagram.
Another box, yeah. And now maybe we should use Kubernetes. So there's a Kubernetes cluster. And
absolutely.
3 weeks later, and then then you have 5 more boxes, 10 more boxes on your architecture diagram. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, I think that summarizes our thoughts as well. I was looking at our mind map that we created earlier, and I think we covered everything here. So let's wrap up here. We also close to the 1 hour mark again, so that's also time flies when discussing things like this.
I think we definitely want to discuss at some point the licensing.
Absolutely.
But I would also need to read a little bit more about it, because I'm still somewhere in between. I don't know where
we're biased.
Yeah, we are very biased. Like, okay, you have the open source mindset, but also the business mindset. And this is also like today what we're discussing. It's great to run open source software, but are you really supporting actually the person that wrote the software? Right? Yeah. That's just using it is maybe not enough. Maybe you should use it and give this person money or this small organization money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then,
it doesn't need to be much, but support your maintainers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they give you the opportunity of running that stuff for free, basically. So
within your organization, find out what you really rely on and whether you're actually supporting this person. I think that is something really to check out. And maybe your organization actually has a lot of money. Sometimes you can just sponsor them.
With GitHub, there's options as well that you can sponsor your maintainers. So in that sense, that the maintainer doesn't become a furniture builder and abandons the project, basically, because it's always a chance that it happens.
Yeah.
All right.
Indeed.
Edward, thanks for your insights, and we'll see each other in the next episode. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.